Persona 5 Tactica is a cash grab, but is that necessarily a bad thing? Let's talk about it. Persona 5 Tactica is the newest game to be released for the Persona series. It takes on the vein of a tactics-style game, turn-based that relies on a grid positioning system and movement, all while performing a balancing act between difficulty, character synergy, and interesting mechanics. And Persona 5 Tactica kind of, well, how's a nice way to put this? Falls flat on its face in quite a number of elements, and while I think there are way more things to critique about this game than there are to praise, there's a couple of elements of this game that are generally pretty damn good, and fun and interesting, and I think valuable to the series. I'm going to be as non-spoiler as I can be here, but I will talk about overall themes and methodologies of storytelling that they invoke, not necessarily specific plot details. So let's actually start there with the story, because in my opinion, it's a great microcosm of all the issues and good that this game has on offer. It is a Persona game after all. Most people are going to go into it for the story. So how is it? Well, I think Strikers does a better job at this, for a very simple reason. In Persona 5 Strikers, it introduces a swath of new characters, particularly with Sophia and Zenkichi. And we end up caring about those two characters because they utilize the Phantom Thieves as a way to develop those characters, while also simultaneously building up and fleshing out various Phantom Thieves and their individual storylines. We got more wacky, fun scenes and adventures with the Phantom Thieves, all while developing the cast still to feel like a worthy sequel to Persona 5, while building up characters that feel like they always belonged with the crew. I am a massive advocate and fan of Persona 5 Strikers in that regard. What about Tactica? Well, Tactica handles it a little bit differently. Instead of having any necessarily involved story arc for any of the Phantom Thieves, the game utilizes the Phantom Thieves and the story they underwent in the base game as a way to spur on kind of the protagonist of this game, Toshiro's, development in his story. As a member of the Phantom Thieves may find some element of his story relatable and tell him what lessons they learned throughout the base game. Same thing with the game's other kind of primary protagonist, Irina. Sure, Joker may be front and center in all the marketing, but make no mistake about it, the game largely revolves around the characters of Toshiro, who looks like every isekai protagonist before they get isekai'd, and Irina. And I think this methodology makes those two characters extremely compelling, but the problem is, and why I prefer Strikers, is because it makes the Phantom Thieves feel just kind of tacked on and extra, and just there for the occasional zinger, instead of being intricate, integral parts of this game's narrative. And this game gets surprisingly dark, darker than I ever thought it would. And when the game eventually decides to double down and focus on specifically the characters of Toshiro and Irina, it's really compelling story-wise. But like I said, the biggest flaw is just in terms of how they incorporate Toshiro and Irina's story alongside the Phantom Thieves, and just personally, I prefer the way Strikers handles it, where each arc kind of focuses and develops one of the Phantom Thieves right alongside the focal character for the game. It's a great way to make it feel like it belongs and is supposed to be a Persona game with the stories ever evolving and advancing, while introducing these new and interesting characters, which Toshiro and Irina are. I really do appreciate and love these characters. It's just the way they are handled is just in a way that I find less compelling, structurally wise, compared to, say, Zenkichi and Sophia. Because the Phantom Thieves feel like they're just along there for the ride instead of being massive parts of the story. Because I know what they were going for. They wanted each Phantom Thief to utilize the character development and the lessons that they learned in the base game to further the story of Toshiro and Irina, to have them be able to relate to them on some level. And in certain aspects, I think that does work, just not as strong as it could be. But I will say, if this game has points of brilliance, they come in two aspects. The story of Irina and Toshiro, which in my opinion is amazing. S-tier quality writing, my opinion. But also the music. I genuinely adore the P5 soundtrack, and the P5 Tactica soundtrack on the whole is largely more of that, with some new songs that I really came to appreciate. And I'm actively going to listen to them probably once I finish recording this. There's some absolute bangers here, though they may suffer from repeating a couple songs a few too many times throughout the various missions. Now, those are the two aspects to this game that I think are by far and away the best aspects to the game, because the game has a lot of other issues, and one critical flaw that I will not get over. And maybe we should address that right now, because it's going to paint and color why I view certain aspects as critically as I do. Let's talk about the price. This game is priced as a $60 game. On Steam right now, it is on sale with the winter sale, which may end up dating this video a little bit, but you know what I mean. At $60, I cannot recommend this game. It took me about 30 hours to beat on merciless difficulty. Now granted, about halfway through, I gave up on trying to 3-star every mission and going for all the side missions and stuff, but on the hardest difficulty, and mind you, I got 3 stars on quite a few missions just accidentally, it took me about 30 hours in total. It's not a long game, which is not necessarily an issue, but when we're talking a value discussion about this game, when we are talking about whether or not this game is worth $60, when the game is as short as it is, has the flaws that we'll get into, that we've already started to peel back the layers on, but also has paid DLC with additional story missions and all that, that's where I draw the line and say this game is not worth $60. If it had the DLC included, day one DLC I might add, then maybe you can make an argument. But the problem is, you have that paid DLC that exists on day one as content that was ripped from the game to be sold back to you, the player. That to me is inexcusable and is a permanent blemish on this game. A game that by itself already struggles to be worth $60 is an even bigger slap in the face when there is additional content that would have been great to pad out the value for the game with characters we know and love from Persona 5 Royal. It devalues the game. Wait, even with that DLC, it would be a tough sell at $60. Without it, it's inexcusable in my opinion. I played this game because I have PC Game Pass, and Persona 5 Tactica was on Game Pass, and is on Game Pass. And that is really the only way I would ever recommend someone playing this game, because it's too expensive otherwise. If the game was $20, maybe $30, I could see it. But the problem is, it's a deeply flawed game that is way overpriced. There's not one interesting boss fight in the entire game. They are all repetitive, dull, and giant health sponges, or devolve to doing essentially the same mission 3 times in a row. You know the one I'm talking about if you played the game before. And that one's honestly probably the best boss fight, because it's not even treated as a boss fight. You just go through an obstacle course of regular mobs, essentially. Get to the boss, shoot them once, you get sent back to the beginning, and their level is rearranged for you to rinse and repeat 3 times in a row. In total, it's a 3-phase boss. The others are just health sponges. Go on way too long, are boring, derivative, and uninteresting, that lack mechanics, even on the hardest difficulty merciless. They're all extremely formulaic, and wildly outstayed their welcome. And if the boss's HP was a third of what it was, maybe these fights would be more enjoyable, because there are some cool mechanics there. But the problem is, the boss is just way too health spongy for these fights to remain enjoyable past the first minute or so, and each phase drags out for so long, you just end up getting bored, or at least I did. And even my stream chat got bored. You pair subpar boss design with repetitive enemy design. I can think of 4, maybe 5 enemies that appear throughout the entire game. 6 if you really want to classify the speakers as an entire enemy. Essentially, you have the musket people, you have the shotgun people, you have revengers, throwers, and defenders. And in the early parts of the game, I'm not going to classify this as a spoiler because it happens like immediately, you fight the other phantom thieves periodically, and they utilize their own respective skill set. That's interesting, but the mobs become stale and repetitive. And even on Merciless, the game's never really that hard. Sure, it may trip you up in places, but the real difficulty lies in trying to 3-star each of the missions, where each mission gives you 3 arbitrary objectives to complete, 2 of which you probably will anyways, and one of them is generally like a time limit you have. Like, beat this map within 5 rounds, for instance. Stuff like that. Don't let any of your party die. That's where the real challenge would have to come from by doing this game on Merciless and going for all the 3 stars, which I can imagine can produce some semblance of difficulty, but there's honestly not that many hard or really interesting sections. I think one of the coolest mechanics in this game is the triple threat, where essentially if you down an enemy and you get the Phantom Thieves to surround them in a triangle shape, then they'll attack in an all-out attack everyone within that triangle. And it's a really cool maneuver that when you pull it off, and you pull it off well, and you can like fill the entire map with an attack and just damage everybody, you feel insanely good about that. There are aspects of brilliance to this game that I truly cherish and find enjoyable and fun, but they're bogged down by repetitive enemy design, repetitive mission design, as well as dull and uninteresting boss fights. The music is amazing. I love the story of Toshiro and Arena. It takes about half the game to get it going, but once it starts going, it doesn't stop. It's really compelling and interesting, but is bogged down by repetitive and uninspired gameplay on the whole, in my opinion, with an art style that feels really counterintuitive to the actual themes and emotions that they are trying to represent in the game. Like those scenes where we got Toshiro's backstory. They are pretty dang dark, but also really compelling. But at the same time, when you're looking at these chibi art styles, for me at least, it took me out of it to some degree or some capacity. Or at least I wasn't as immersed, and I was actively thinking this, as I would be if the game was just in the P5 art style or the P5 Strikers art style. I won't talk about specifics when it comes to the ending, but I'm going to talk about my overall feeling about the ending right now. Like, what was that? I could honestly make an entire video about how bad the ending to this game is, outside of the post-credit scene. Outside of that one scene, the ending's garbage. All the payoff and resolution happens off-screen, and we're stuck with like a PNG of the after effects while the Phantom Thieves narrate what happened. Like, what happened here? Did they not expect people to actually beat the game? Did they come up against like a deadline or something? Like, what happened here? It feels so rushed, but then you get the post-credit scene, and sure, it's a bit generic, but I thought it was heartwarming, while also being bittersweet in a way, and I really enjoyed the post-credit scene, because the actual plot events and moments that happened are really cool and compelling. It's just the way they are displayed and conveyed to the player leaves a lot to be desired, in my opinion. So is Persona 5 Tactica a cash grab, in my opinion? Yes. Who would I recommend this game for? Because there is an audience, I think, specifically. If you love P5, also, if you also love tactics-style games, like Final Fantasy Tactics or XCOM, or even Fire Emblem, something like that. If you're a massive fan of that genre, while also loving P5 and the cast of P5, and also you don't want a lot from the Phantom Thieves, you just want an excuse really to see them again, if you fulfill all 3 of those criteria, and you don't mind the art style, then I would recommend this game for you. But I can't imagine that audience is monstrously big, because otherwise the game is overpriced, has cut content sold back to you as the player, piecemeal in the form of DLC, in a package of a game that is already struggling to justify $60 even if it had the DLC included, let alone without. It's a deeply flawed product that has moments of brilliance. So can I recommend Persona 5 Tactica? Only if you fulfill those criteria. If not, I would recommend you wait for a massive sale, like 70 to 75% off at least. Or, if you have Game Pass, then sure, give it a try. But otherwise, I can't really in good conscience recommend this game. Do I regret playing it? No. I thought it was enjoyable, but it is the most average experience I've ever had. Like, there are absolutely worst games out there, I'm not saying that's like the worst game of the year or anything like that. I just can't say that it's all that memorable. And in a year with strong game releases already, like 2023, it's especially hard to recommend this game. So if you got Game Pass and you really want to give it a try, then sure, give it a try. Maybe you may enjoy it more than I did. But outside of that, it's hard to justify the price. And I don't even think the comedy scenes with the Phantom Thieves are all that funny on the whole. There's a couple that are decent, but on the whole, the Phantom Thieves are just kind of there. And now that I've said that, it's a great way to summarize this game. It's just kind of there. And with that, I will call the video there for the day. Thank you all for tuning in. My pleasure for making the video. If you enjoyed it, please leave a like and subscribe. It really helps the channel out and helps support future content, and I greatly appreciate it. Stay safe, have a great day, go play some video games if you can, and as always, I'll see you all next time. Bye-bye, everybody. Until we meet again.